It's wonderful to have everybody here to talk about the Sing Sing Files, Dan's new book, and it's kind of the idea of me telling the stories when you are here as one of the greatest multimedia storytellers, particularly in this space of the past literally 20 years.
I'm glad you raised the bar a little bit.
So I'm gonna get out of the way early. I do want to say one thing. I went looking for little tidbits online about your bio.
Oh, that's not
and Dan has done a lot of things with a lot of wonderful organizations. He's got bios in all sorts of different places of the internet, Vera, et cetera. Certainly the reason we're here is for his book, The Sing Sing Files, One Journalist, Six Innocent Men, and a 20-Year Fight for Justice. Many of you may also know that Dan and his colleague Preeti Varathan produced a podcast called Letters from Sing Sing that debuted at #1 on the Apple charts and was actually a Pulitzer finalist in 2024 for audio reporting. So he's great with TV because he's been on producing Dateline for 20 years. Great with the printed word, and he sounds terrific if you haven't listened to him. He's great in your ears. But when I learned, when I was doing the bio, is that your bio is different in different places. And two places
None
where
of it
it's
is true.
two places where it's the same are the Pulitzer finalist and your LinkedIn bio. So I don't know if you went, oh my God, the Pulitzer people made me look so great, I'm gonna make it your LinkedIn bio. Or if the Pulitzer people went, man, he's such a great writer, we're just gonna take that bio and put it on our website.
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I didn't even know the Pulitzer had a website.
They do, you're on it, and let me tell you what it says.
Wow.
It says that you've won and been nominated for many awards in 30 years as an investigative journalist at NBC News and its news magazine Dateline, spearheading dozens of documentaries, hidden camera investigations, particular focus on wrongful convictions and mass incarcerations, obviously two topics of tremendous importance to us. But I could read the bio, but here's what I would tell you, knowing Dan, having Dan as a friend. What comes through in all of that reporting is that Dan has a passion, a human passion for this issue. And he rolls up his sleeves and he gets involved in it in ways that I don't think anybody else in the country has done. He's done a TEDx talk from Sing Sing, a town hall from Sing Sing, bringing the voices of people who've been incarcerated into the forefront, making them active participants in the discussion. He got Lester Holt to agree to spend 2 nights in Angola Penitentiary in Louisiana so that people could really see what it's like. He worked with inmates to create a video called Voices from Within, where they use their voices and their experiences to try to reduce gun violence. And the zealous passion that you use to continue to pursue this work over time is really spectacular. And this book is, I think, the latest evidence of that. The excellence with which he does it is more than a dozen Emmy nominations, 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards, a Sigma Delta Chi Award honoring his work from the Society of Professional Journalists. So that's your peers telling you that they know how cool you are.
You're embarrassing me.
Good. And he's not even the star of the show.
No.
See, nice segue.
Never have.
So it's one thing for me or for Dan to tell an exoneree's story. But it's another thing to have that person be here to tell it themselves. There's nothing like hearing from the lived experience that somebody like David Lemus brings with us tonight. I'm not going to tell the story. I'm going to let you do that, the two of you do that. But David was sentenced to 25 years in prison for a murder that he didn't commit. It was known 2 years after his conviction, when another man actually confessed to the crime to federal prosecutors. The federal prosecutors did the right thing at the time and brought it to local prosecutors and then to David's defense attorneys. Then they decided that they were going to fight it and not believe it, and that led to quite the saga as David fought to prove his innocence. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan and to David to tell their story. We are tracking, for those of you on Zoom, we are tracking questions. We do have a microphone in the room, and both Dan and David have said they'd much rather this be a conversation than a monologue. So as we go, if you do have questions, feel free to raise your hand. We'll get a microphone to you. And if you have questions, put them on the Zoom, and we'll be tracking that as well. With that, please welcome Dan Slepian and David Lemus.
That was a really nice introduction.
Thank you.
I'm not a ranker, but that was the nicest introduction ever.
Oh.
And thank you for writing a blurb for the book as well. But really appreciate that. Thank you for all being here. I do want to make this as much of an intimate conversation as possible. We say no monologues, and then I end up giving you a long monologue. But I just kind of want to set the stage of where we are, or at least where I am in my brain, and that starts here with the picture above me. Nope, not that one.
Not that one.
No, not that picture. It's that picture. So this is taken 2 weeks ago on Texas death row with an incarcerated man condemned to die named Robert Robertson. 20 years ago, his daughter, Nikki, a 2-year-old, was killed. Well, I shouldn't say was killed, she died. And he didn't even know Nikki was alive for the first year and a half of her life. She was sick from the moment she was born. She had been to the hospital more than 40 times. He had taken her to the doctor 2 days before her death. Her temperature was 104.5 degrees. She was given a medication that now has a black box warning for children for its deadly effects. Unfortunately, the detective who arrested him for shaken baby syndrome didn't know any of that. If he is executed in 48 hours from now, he will be the first person in the United States to die because of shaken baby syndrome diagnosis, which has now been largely, I'm hesitant to use the word debunked because that's a very strong word, but the science has certainly evolved since the time that he was convicted. It used to be believed that what's called the triad, cerebral hemorrhaging, swelling of the brain, and retinal hemorrhaging meant only one thing, shaken baby syndrome, and a lot of people were convicted because of that. We now know there's a whole bunch of differential diagnoses for the same conditions. He has bipartisan support from literally most of the legislators in Texas. And no one is even saying a crime occurred. Yet, 3 hours ago, he was denied another appeal. And tomorrow, the Texas Board of Parole and Probation will decide whether to recommend to the governor whether he gets a stay. But if he doesn't, which is likely, just based on history, what I believe in is an innocent man will die. He knows the moment of his death. And it's 6 o'clock Central Time on Thursday. So I want you all to remember where you are on Thursday at 6 o'clock Central Time. And the reason I wanted to start with that is because that's the mood I'm in. Because when we talk about that scenario, forget about innocence or guilt. It's pathological. It's irrational. And I've come to learn the depth of that pathology through my work in wrongful convictions, starting with this guy. That was the tip of the spear. David's case was my baptism into the world of wrongful convictions. I grew up thinking, as a kid in Westchester County, New York, that the justice system worked just the way it should. When I started working at Dateline in 1996, that only reaffirmed my belief. I did series with Las Vegas homicide detectives, and right after 9/11, I was embedded. I decided I wanted to follow New York City detectives, so I was embedded with the Bronx Homicide Task Force. They assigned a detective to me by the name of Detective Bobby Adelorado. He was a first-grade homicide detective, meaning the highest rank you can get. Only a few hundred out of about 5,000 detectives have reached that level of the coveted gold shield. He had made about 1,500 arrests in his career. And I'm just following murders. That's why I was there. Real-time homicide investigations. Now, this is 5 years before the iPhone was invented, before digital, when we had little tapes. So this wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now. And I was following him for a couple of weeks, and I said to him, "You must bring this job home with you, everything you see." And he says, "I really don't, except this one case. This one case has been bothering me for a decade." That's when my producer hat went on. What's that about? He starts telling me about a murder that happened at the Palladium nightclub on Thanksgiving night, 1990, in Manhattan. He was a Bronx detective. He had never heard of it. But Bobby was taking down a gang in the Bronx called the CNC gang, very, very violent gang. They were responsible for about half of the murders in the South Bronx at the time, which had one of the highest murder rates in the entire country. This is the bad old days of 1990 when there were 2,245 murders. Last year there were 319 in New York. So when everyone tells you crime is rising, they're lying. But that's a different story. So Bobby starts telling me that this gang that he's taken down, he arrests these two guys. He arrests a guy named Joey. And Joey cops to these murders. And when you, as many of you know, you in the federal system, and you proffer, you're queen for a day, you have to tell everything you've ever said in the history of crime. And if you lie now, or if you ever lie in the future, you're going away, right? So Joey's copping to all these crimes, and he says to Bobby, me and Spanky, we committed the Palladium murder on Thanksgiving night. So Bobby looks into it. He finds a 911 call a few days after the crime. Spanky and Joey did it, finds all this information. And basically, he's told by the Manhattan DA's office that he's not on the money with his facts. So I start following his reinvestigation in 2002. In front of my camera, he finds information that the Manhattan DA's office hid. I don't know how softer to say that. Like notes from Spanky's sister-in-law saying he tried to rape me. And when he was trying to rape me, my husband, his brother told me he did the Palladium murder. That he was put in a lineup in a photo array and picked by their own eyewitnesses. Never put in a lineup. Bobby goes to his bosses and he's basically kicked off the case. I'm kicked out. He's ordered to remain silent. He quits his job to talk to me on camera about it. The two innocent guys in prison, by the way, were named David Lemus and Amado Hidalgo. He quits his job to talk to me on camera about it. I continue to follow the case. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office assigns an assistant district attorney by the name of Dan Bibb, B-I-B-B. He reinvestigates the case, and he believes David is guilty at the beginning. I start talking to him over the course of 19 months, and he comes to the conclusion that David and Almeida Hidalgo are innocent, and Joey and Spanky are guilty. He's ordered to protect the convictions. He quits his job to talk to me on camera about it. I continue to investigate the case. I get Spanky to come to Rockefeller Center and basically confess on tape. We air a show in 2005, and the bouncers come forward and saw the show and said, yeah, it was Spanky, not these guys. Didn't matter. DA's office dug in. They went to a hearing that lasted 9 months while David was in Rikers Island, a day here and a day there. Month 7, they walked in after fighting for 15 years and said, oh, Hidalgo, yeah, we think he's innocent. He never met Hidalgo. They never met each other. There's no connection. No one knows how Hidalgo got involved. He was snatched out of thin air, basically. They said, oh, yeah, we think he's innocent. And the conviction was vacated, and he was immediately handcuffed and brought to INS and deported to the Dominican Republic. David, they said, was still guilty. 2 more months he waited in Rikers Island. And finally, in October of 2005, his conviction was vacated. To this day, not only has the Manhattan District Attorney's Office never admitted they were wrong, they made David wait 2 more years to retry him. They retried him. Spanky got on the stand and confessed to being the killer. The jury took less than an hour to acquit him. The prosecutor stood up and walked out of the courtroom, and then David was forced to go on with his life after that. That was my baptism into the world of wrongful convictions. I went to go interview David's mother, Nilsa, a beautiful, lovely woman, on Thanksgiving Day, 2002, on the anniversary for the murder for which he was wrongfully convicted. I thought his story was a 1 in a million story. I walked into the lobby. And standing there was a woman holding the hands of two little boys. She said, are you Dan? And I said, I'm Dan. She said, my son JJ told me you were coming, and he's innocent. Can you help us? I remember Jacob, the smaller one, and I remember JJ Jr., but I remember Jacob because of his eyes and the way he looked up at me. Huge, beautiful eyes. And I remember thinking to myself, I was about to be a father for the first time. I don't know what I just walked into. This little boy should not be in a prison on Thanksgiving morning. I don't care what his father did. That was my first reaction. It turns out that JJ shared a wall with David in prison. And David told him I was coming. And JJ asked his mother to wait for me, to get my attention. And I told her, I didn't believe her at first. I didn't know. I told her, I'll look into it, send me whatever you want, mainly for that little kid. And I said, it's going to take a long time. You know what? She was relieved. She was relieved because nobody had ever answered her. No one had ever given her the time to look at her and say, maybe you're telling the truth. And so began my journey. I spent a decade looking into JJ's case. It aired in 2012. Nominated for 3 Emmy Awards. I say that not to pat myself on the back. I say that to recognize that the journalistic community saw it as an act of journalism. Anybody who saw that story could see his innocence. What happened? Circle the wagons, double down. I did a podcast in 2023. Nothing happened. I mean, he got out in 2021 on clemency. And then he was finally exonerated 2 weeks ago, after this book came out, 10 days after this book came out. In the interim, he led me to 3 other people that I did stories on, Eric Lisson, Johnny Hincapie, and Richard Rosario, who all got out. And JJ was the last one out. And so that's kind of in a nutshell how we got to where, and that's why I call David the Godfather, because he started it all. But we've been together for a long time now, and I think folks probably want to hear about your experience.
Can everybody hear me okay? I just flew in from Florida, so my ears are still haven't unpopped. If you have a problem, just wave your hand and I'll try to speak a little bit louder.
What'd you say?
One thing I will say is actually we should be speaking louder for the folks on Zoom. The folks on Zoom are having trouble with the volume, so let's speak louder. If we blow you guys out with the speakers, we apologize.
We're having a little problem.
Okay, so we'll be louder.
You want me to start over from the beginning?
From the middle.
Okay.
First and foremost, thank you everyone for being here today, and everybody online also. I know I have a lot of friends and family watching. I really don't know where to begin other than with Dan, because before Dan, there was nothing. You know, I was arrested in 1991 and convicted in 1992, sentenced in 1993, and then life became a blank. You know, you put up this wall where you want to block everything out, everyone out, even your loved ones. I even tried to block him out when he was coming to see me. I got to a point where I said, listen, you know, I need you to stop coming to see me so frequently. He didn't understand why. And every time I went down to the visit room, it was the realization of what you were missing in your own life. I didn't have children. I didn't have a wife. I was 20-something years old with a life sentence. But when I met Dan, I'll fast forward from 1993 to when I met Dan, probably, when did we meet?
Let's not make this about me.
I know, but it's a story. When I met him, it finally gave me a sense of hope. You know, because like Maria, which we premeditated with him, we made sure we had her in the lobby when he was coming. There was nothing there. It was appeal, denied, upon appeal, denied, Every appeal that I ever submitted was denied. Every motion that we put in was denied. 1996, 2005, whatever was it, the conviction was overturned. But when he came into the picture, and then I learned about Bobby Alvarado, who is pretty much the hero of all this, because he's the first pawn in this chess game that got us to the point where we were able to win. And it opened my eyes onto, like there is hope for us. When we're in there, we just need that shining light. I never had that shining light. He's my shining light. He doesn't want me to talk about him. I refuse to tell my story without talking about him. But ironically, one of the things that he mentioned is while I was in there, I met JJ, who just happened to be in the cell right next to me. And I can't explain how our friendship, our bond started, but I developed a brotherhood with him and a love for this guy that today we're all still friends. He started off as a journalist doing a story for Dateline NBC. He's my brother. I'm an only child, but I have brothers, thanks to them. But try not to get emotional. The prosecutorial misconduct that's been happening has been happening for the longest time. The unfortunate part is that we live in a society of if it doesn't apply, let it fly. It normally hits home different when you know a person that's in that position. Somebody could pick up the book, read it. If you don't know anybody in that position, you're gonna put it down and go about your business the next day. But if you happen to know someone, it enlightens you, and it's like you say, you become a lantern. Maybe you'll tell somebody else, because at the end of the day, we need more people. We have a platform now through social media and through the media that we never had in 1991. When I went in there, they had big brick phones. And when I came home, I didn't even know how to use a cell phone. I was the Rip Van Winkle, 14 years in prison, and I came out here and they're passing me phones. I didn't know what Eric did. He held this phone upside down. At least I knew where the antenna went. But needless to say, it's hard. Life in prison is hard. As I mentioned, I'm an only child. I was raised by my mom. My mom was the only one, other than a few cousins of mine, that would come to see me periodically. And then it even got to the point where I pushed my mom away, not wanting to see my mom, but because my mom had met somebody that she actually fell in love with. And that person was in Florida, and I was in the New York State Penitentiary. So I begged my mother to go to Florida and start a life, which she did. But she would come up every Thanksgiving, and that was our family reunion. And we would coordinate it with JJ and Maria so that we can all be together and share that moment. I haven't had one of those with JJ and Maria since we've gotten out, but hopefully we will.
Well, I'd like to have more of a conversation, yeah.
Well, we need to hang on, let me get the microphone.
Yeah, the first thing I'll say right before we get there is, the other part of this, I hate giving these talks without recognizing mass incarceration as a whole. It was through the prism of innocence that I realized the irrationality of our system, like literal pathology, that we're paying more money to make ourselves less safe, that we're sending juveniles to life forever without any sort of recourse. I met Henry Montgomery in Angola when he was locked up the month that JFK was assassinated. It was 2018 that I met him. He had a gun. He was the only black kid in the town. I mean, the black kid in the town that he kept getting beaten up in the South, and he was playing hooky, and he had his grandfather's gun, and a white truant officer in plainclothes woke him up. He got scared, shot him. He killed the officer. They rounded up every black kid in town. Henry Montgomery comes forward in 1963 and says, "I did it. Here's the gun." He brings them to his grandfather's barn, shows them where it is. First, he got the death penalty. Then they moved it to life in prison. But Miller versus Alabama says juvenile lifers without parole is unconstitutional. Montgomery versus Louisiana made that retroactive. So hundreds of people got out under Montgomery versus Louisiana. But when I went to Angola, there was Henry Montgomery. He hadn't gotten out. So we were there the day he had his parole hearing. Back then, you had to be unanimous. It had to be 3 unanimous votes in Louisiana First person, Mr. Montgomery, congratulations, you did enough time. Second person, Mr. Montgomery, go on with your life. Third person, Mr. Montgomery, I think you need more programming. A guy by day was a physical therapist, by the way, volunteer. He did 2 more years. Why? Like we talk about purpose, right? It's through the prism of innocence that allowed me to look into Pandora's box. And what we have is an undeniable crisis. Undeniable. And my belief is that, this is me talking, my belief is that a couple hundred years from now, our predecessors are going to look back at this time the way we look at slavery. What we're doing is insane. We are spending more money to make ourselves less safe.
Thank you. I want to ask about police eventually, but first I want to talk about the DAs and the judges. They all went to law schools like this law school. How is this happening?
The number one question I always get asked. Did you ever see the Stanford experiment movie? The test by a scientist named Philip Zimbardo. He broke his class into some were guards, half the guards randomly, half the guards were incarcerated people. And the test had to end because the guards were abusing the incarcerated people. They're all students. It was the basement of a college. It kind of proved a theory that you act to your uniform, right? I don't have a good answer because the problem is so pervasive. I don't believe there's a bad guy. I believe that the reason people are wrongfully convicted, and everybody that we know who is factually wrongfully convicted, all has been through this process. All have had appeals, denied a bunch of times, right? So there's something there. What is it? I think it's like why there's a long line at the DMV. Everyone's just doing their jobs. Like in the 90s, New York City was out of control. Or even now in high crime rate, right? So you get a case, you're a detective, your sergeant's on your back about making an arrest. Their lieutenant is on their back about them being on you to make an arrest. Here's a story in my book. So they say, oh, okay, we got two eyewitnesses that say that's the guy. Forget the fact that the way the procedures were ridiculous. We're just gonna clear the case. This guy says he has 13 alibi witnesses in Florida. These 2 people said he was in the Bronx. I have probable cause. It's not up to me, says the detective. It's up to the defense, and the prosecutor will figure it out. So his probable cause, he makes his arrest. Now the prosecutor has the case. Prosecutors the system is designed to subtly and not so subtly encourage people with great responsibility to act irresponsibly in ways they don't even realize. So when the prosecutor gets the case, they say to themselves, well, we have the witnesses saying it's them. I believe them. That's what the defense is for if he has an alibi. And then the defense attorney comes in, who's court appointed generally, good person, means probably better than some private attorneys. But they only happen to have 200 cases and don't have time, right? And so they can't really fully investigate the alibi. And then you have the jurors. When you're sitting at the table, well, you're sitting at the defense table. The cops think you did it. The prosecutors think you did it. You obviously did it. And by the way, we've been here 3 days. It's the last chapter in my book. The juror in JJ's case, one of the jurors in JJ's case, told me, I walked into the room, this was about 1.5 years ago, 22 years after his conviction or whatever, 25 years. And she started crying. She said, I always knew he was innocent. They were sequestered for 3 days, and everyone was fighting and tired, and everyone gave in because they wanted to go home for the weekend and see their kids. So then the bar becomes extraordinarily high post-conviction. And the tie always seems to go to the prosecutor, even when there's not ties. So I don't know how to answer why Robert Robertson is about to die. I don't know how to answer why Marcellus Williams was killed a few weeks ago when DNA evidence showed that his DNA was not on the weapon, when the victim's family asked for him to be spared, while the prosecutor asked for him to be spared, but they killed him. Why? Because that's the way the system works. That's the rule, not the exception.
So I'd be interested in hearing both from you and from David on this. One of the ways in which your case is different than a Marcellus Williams, I agree with you completely that the system is built on finality. And there is, as you all probably know, there is no appellate claim in most jurisdictions. There is no appellate claim for actual innocence.
Why don't you say that again?
There is no appellate claim, there is no constitutional right of actual innocence.
Meaning you could be killed, constitutionally be killed and be actually innocent.
Because what we're protecting is a process and not, the facts are what the jury says they are. And we put a lot of faith in a jury and a judge and the process that we have to identify the truth. And I think most of the time, that trust is well placed. But a lot of the time, the jury doesn't see all the information that we would like them to see. It's not known, it's not communicated, it's hidden, whatever it may be. But in a situation where I think increasingly we are prizing finality over truth. But one of the things that makes the Marcellus Williams case different, and I think one of the things that in general usually helps people who are exonerated, is the ability to identify the actual perpetrator. The ability to go to a jurisdiction of prosecutors and not just say, this person is innocent, but to say, this person is innocent and I know because this person is the perpetrator. So that the prosecutor's office is not faced with just saying we blew it. They're able to say, but we've solved it now.
How unfair is that?
Well, it is, but what's interesting to me about this instance is that you had that, and you still had to go through a retrial. And so I'm curious, David, if you had conversations with your lawyer about that at the time, if there was a rationale for why you were retried, talk to me about what that period was like.
One of the things is Spanky, James Rodriguez, was arrested the day that my 440 hearing was going to be heard. So it was kind of like the prosecutors wanted to clean stuff up right then and there. And arresting Spanky 15 years later wasn't the answer. They had evidence on Spanky since before they arrested me. They chose to ignore that. They chose to ignore all the evidence that was presented to them from 1990 until the day I was released. They had evidence that was Rosario and Brady material that I could have used at my first trial and maybe bettered my chances at being acquitted. Instead, they withheld that.
Clearly, it bettered your chances of being acquitted because you were acquitted very
Well,
quickly
the answer
when
is,
you had that information.
The answer is that they made the shooter, they changed their theory of the crime in 2005 to a 3-shooter case, a 2-shooter case. They just said, we always knew about Spanky,
And the second,
but that doesn't mean he's innocent.
second trial, first trial was me, Hidalgo, and they said there was always a third person there. When we don't know who that person is, we have no identity. They were saying that person was a Spanky. They were totally incorrect. When Spanky's name came about, after Dan had mentioned when they dropped the charges against Hidalgo, they chose to retry me. But their theory in the second trial, they twisted everything around. I wasn't allowed to bring up the fact that I was in prison 15 years because it would be unfair. They didn't let me bring up the fact that I had Olmedo Hidalgo as my co-defendant for 14 of those years. And then now they were saying that it was me, Joey, and Spanky that committed that crime together.
So, and actually, this is a way in which I think your case and Marcellus Williams' case are the same, in that the absence of access to you to the case, of your access to the case, is then used to say, well, we can't prove he's not a perpetrator.
Correct.
And that's not the way innocence is supposed to work. It's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, not if I can't prove your guilt. If I can't prove your innocence, then I'm going to assume your guilt, right? And so once that guilt determination is made, the difficulty that our jurisdictions have in being willing to look at that again. I mean, I think we're getting better with conviction integrity units around the country, but Manhattan's had a conviction integrity unit for quite a while, and we're still having this challenge.
Yeah, I just, what you're saying is absolutely correct. That is what they want. It drives me crazy. Because when you have a case of innocence, somebody's been railroaded. Why should it be up to them to find the real killer? To me, those are two different issues. And most cases don't have DNA or physical evidence. So those are the cases that I take on that need the shoe leather work, that need knocking on doors and talking to people. If I could prove that you're innocent, that's the first thing. It would be great to find out who did it. I'm still interested in all my cases who did it, a bunch of them.
Emma, would you mind just taking this microphone and walking it around to folks who have questions? You have a question, right? I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dan.
You did not. You can anytime you want.
You just mentioned conviction integrity units. I have a question. I've listened now to a couple of the programs we've had here in terms of wrongful convictions. I'm a former federal prosecutor for over 14 years. This is really disturbing to hear these stories in terms of prosecutors, not coming forward with evidence when they know someone's innocent. So my question is, what has been your experience, Dan, given the years we've seen the growing number of wrongful convictions come forward? What has been your experience with different prosecutors, be they local, state, or federal, establishing conviction integrity units in their offices, given, what's become apparent wrongful convictions and exonerations after people spend years and years in jail?
Thank you.
And I'd like you to distinguish between local, state, and federal. But maybe I'm biased, but I have to believe this is not nearly as serious part of the federal level versus local or state level. And help me if I'm wrong on that.
Well, first of all, thank you. But first of all, if you were disturbed by what you've heard, I'm not trying to sell my book to you, but
I am. Buy the book.
but we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg about what's troubling. Like DAs coming after me, right? There's a lot that's troubling. And what the benefit of 20 years have done has given me the time to put dots together to form a pattern. And none of this is made up, by the way. I shot 1,000 hours of tape over 20 years, so everything is real, which is even more disturbing. Conviction integrity units, it's a difficult, I have to be honest with you to let you know that I don't know how objective I am when it comes to analyzing conviction integrity units, because my experience with them has been exactly the opposite of what they're intended to be. So conviction integrity units were formed. The first one to be formed was in Dallas by Craig Watkins. And the notion that Craig Watkins stepped up and said, maybe somebody's wrongfully convicted back then, it was like a really big deal. Like that was like an earth-shattering moment in the movement, right? Which goes to show you how far we have to go, right? And now I think that they're somewhere near 90 or something like that. But local, I can tell you about my experience with the Manhattan DA's office. With what? The Manhattan DA's office. I've had a lot of experience with the Manhattan DA's office. I can tell you about the Brooklyn DA's office. Two different worlds. The Brooklyn DA's office, I'll give you an example. The first Manhattan Conviction Review Integrity Unit was formed not under Robert Morgenthau, who held that office for 35 years, retiring at age 90. It was formed in 2010 by Cyrus Vance Jr. Barry Scheck, who co-founded the Innocence Project, was one of the people on his transition team to help form that unit. The idea is it to be a collaborative, open, transparent process. What Cy Vance's unit did, JJ's case, who was in the cell next to David, was one of the first cases right around when my broadcast aired to be reviewed by that unit. They did their investigation for 15, 16, maybe 13 months, I don't know, 16 months. They wrote a long memo after telling his attorneys not to file any paperwork, let us finish our job. They wrote a memo saying that there was not enough evidence to reverse the conviction, even though two of his eyewitnesses recanted. But here's the brazen part about it, and this kind of answers maybe the mindset. What I found so brazen was that when I read that report, there was something that was glaringly missing. Not only did they not interview, they never even called JJ's alibi witnesses. They were protecting their conviction. They were describing legally why their conviction was a good, they may be right, by the way. I'm not a lawyer. They may be right. But if you're looking for findings of truth and fact, did this person commit this crime? That's not what that unit was doing. So much so that when Alvin Bragg ran for office, one of his campaign pledges on his website was to demolish what he called the CRINO, Conviction Review in Name Only, CRINO, on the DA's website. When Alvin Bragg was elected, he took up JJ's case. 3 years ago, after my report in 2012, after JJ got an apology from President Biden in the White House, after my Pulitzer finalist podcast, and now after my book, did he just get exonerated 2 weeks ago after 27 years after his wrongful arrest. My understanding is that the Manhattan DA's office has vacated under Alvin Bragg about 5 cases of homicides, if I'm not mistaken. There's something like 3.5 to 4 million convictions in the past 40 years in New York, right? So my view, so there was nothing open and collaborative, by the way, about that process. Interestingly, Alvin Bragg's process was open and collaborative with his defense. And just last year, there was even more paperwork that was found, that was hidden. From the state, I've had experience with the state. There's a guy named Darrell Kelly in Orange County, New York, that I did a story with Lester Holt 10 years ago. His daughter, Shania, said that she was raped by him when she was 9 years old. Right afterwards, she denied it. She said her mom was on drugs and made her say it. She went on tape saying she denied it. The judge back then said no. I got a letter from Darrell. I get reached out from Shania, the daughter. Lester interviews the daughter. It never happened. She goes to visit him. He was in the military. He was never arrested before. We interview the mother. I was on drugs. I don't know why I did it. I made Shania say it. The Orange County DA recused himself because he convicted him. It went to a state commission on wrongful convictions, run by a group of people, and you know what? They upheld the conviction, and he spent another 6 years in prison. It was clear as day to anybody. Federally, I don't have as much experience with, although I don't know how many federal exonerations there have been. I don't know any. That's not saying there aren't any, by the way.
Well, there have been some, and obviously, when you're talking about violent crimes, 90% of that is the state and local, and only 10% is federal. So, but there is not. The Department of Justice has not created a conviction integrity unit. There's no reason to think that the Department of Justice is any better at making mistakes, right? Let's for the moment assume good faith in everybody involved, and let's take out the intentional misconduct that exists, rarely but exists and causes a lot of these cases. Let's assume that the federal government is completely absent of that. There's no intentional misconduct in the federal system whatsoever. There's nothing to suggest they're any better at human error than the state and local folks, right? And so you've got to assume that there are some, and we just haven't found them yet. But there is no conviction integrity unit. And we've seen, as you said, there are a range of units, right? From conviction preservation units to, I think Brooklyn's a great example of a unit that from the jump has really worked hard to do
My
these
friend
things
Charlie Linehan runs it.
in good faith. I have to do one administrative thing, which I should have done earlier, which is for continuing legal education, I have to use the password Sing Sing.
In Yiddish, my mother would say mittendrin, meaning right now?
Right now.
Okay.
It's very brief. The first password for CLE is Sing Sing. The second thing I have to do is I want to turn back and I want to ask David a question again. And that is, you mentioned right before we came in here that you go through the experience, the injustice of incarceration, and then you come out, and they just turn you out. And now you have to deal with the injustice of not having been taken care of in your release and being prepared for what it's like now that you're out. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's the second injustice that we do.
One of the hardest things was coming back home and just trying to adjust to society again. I was new to everything. I didn't have a driver's license. I went in when I was 22 years old, and I came out when I was 37. You know, to this day, I'm 56 now. I still struggle. I had PTSD. You know, I had my moments where I'm at a traffic light. If I see a cop car behind me, you know, you get the flutter of the heart. But it's been a continuous uphill battle. And it's gonna be like that. It's never gonna, life's never gonna plateau where I'll feel comfortable.
We'll always be there with you, though.
I do it day by day. I wish I could write a cookbook on it, because if I could, I'd be rich. But what's kept me grounded and what keeps me moving now is I'm engaged and I have 3 children.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So I have 3 teenagers.
First one was born on Christmas Day.
Christmas Day. Thank you. Thank you. A year to date after I was released, that little boy came. But, you know, I still deal with my daily struggles. You know, I work a 9-to-5 job like everybody else. In the beginning, after I got out, I settled on my case immediately because I was put in a position where I had so much pressure on me between trying to write my life, trying not to get in trouble, trying to, you know, just do everything the right way with a baby coming. And I settled on my case prematurely. You know, I didn't get anything near what I should have gotten on my settlement. But
He was early on. David was before the Central Park 5.
4 to 5.
The exonerated 5.
The exonerated.
Exonerated 5, correct. So to this day now, you know, I have my moments where there's days that I feel great, and then I have, you know, my moments where there's days where I just feel like I'm carrying more baggage. And my fiance sees it. I come to the door and she's like, "Just out, you're slouched over. What's on your mind?" Like, she could read me well. But to answer that, I'm probably gonna go through this for the rest of my life. It's the bottom line. You know, it doesn't matter how perfect the picture is painted. The picture only tells one side of the story.
Well, and I guess I just want to make the point that the experience of being wrongfully convicted, it's not like we make it right by exonerating you.
Right, it's never.
Oh, God.
It isn't made right.
Come over here. Right here.
The current DA was a defense attorney in Philadelphia. There's been a lot of discussion about how he's dealt with prosecution of certain crimes. People may disagree with him on that, but what has been the record of his crino or integrity unit?
Larry Krasner?
Yes.
Yeah, I know Larry. I did a story here about Walter Ograd, who was, Lester and I did a story about Walter Ograd, who was convicted of killing a young girl named Bobby, oh my God, that's an age moment, Jean, Bobby Jean, oh, I'm so sorry, Bobby Jean.
You're just trying to make me feel better.
Yeah, all right, yeah. So I think what's interesting about, first of all, I think that his unit under Patricia Cummings in particular, you know, I don't know this unit so well, but when Patricia Cummings ran it, it was robust, it was honest, it was serious, and it was overwhelmed. I mean, this city is in bad shape when it comes to this issue. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
If you want an example, I had an attorney from Philadelphia call me and say, "I've got a person that we believe is innocent. We've got really good evidence to suggest it." And they gave me the person's name, and I called the unit and said, "Hey, I don't do this every day, but this is a source I trust." And Patricia said to me, "I'm actually going to need more specifics because we actually have 2 people with that name in our queue."
Yeah. So
think about how many people have to be in the queue
Patricia's a
for that
friend
to
of
happen.
mine, and that, by the way, first of all, to me, speaks volumes, right? Because most people in our business don't talk to me. So, and I know, and when I saw with Walter's story, for example, I actually think that in some ways Larry is the current DA he's having a really hard time, because with Walter Ograd's case, it was 2020. They, meaning Patricia Cummings' unit, the DA's unit, had come to the conclusion that he was innocent, that there was information in this box that was never turned over. A book had been written about him by Tom Lowenstein, right? The Trials of Walter Ograd. So it was clear to anybody willing to look at the blades of grass of that case that he was innocent. Regardless, the elected prosecutor was going to the court and saying, "We were wrong." But Larry, as you know, probably, some judges don't like Larry. And they didn't calendar it. And then COVID hit. And Walter got 106-degree fever on death row. And his lawyers called me crying. And we got Lester and I did a story on Nightly News. And Walter called in from death row. I'm not saying that he wouldn't have gotten a court date otherwise, but a couple weeks after that, we got a little publicity. He got a court date in June, and he didn't get out until June. So I think that Larry is doing, based on my knowledge of him as a human being, I think he's doing everything he can with the bureaucracy that he has. And the bureaucracy is the problem. The bureaucracy is always the problem, I think.
So can there be a template, maybe his is the model, and he can, perhaps the two of you could come together with a...
I don't think he's the issue. I don't think the DAs are the issue as much. What I think the issue is the incentives are built into the system. The way the system is constructed for finality, which is important for a lot of reasons, but at the same time, it completely closes the door. If you have a solid claim of innocence, you need a bolt of lightning to strike your jailhouse door to get another day in court, period. And I think a lot of the reasons for that, one of the biggest reasons I think for that is accountability. There is no accountability. It doesn't exist. In New York City, there's a former detective by the name of Louis Scarcella, who is responsible, that we know of, factually, about 24 false confessions. Could be more. We've already paid, as taxpayers in New York, we've already paid his victims $150 million. Not only is he not in jail, he still collects his pension. So until that ends, none of this is going to end.
Well, and of course, that's qualified immunity for police officers, which the way the Supreme Court has interpreted it amounts to absolute immunity. But prosecutors have absolute immunity, which means even if they were to admit to doing it intentionally, they would be immune from civil litigation.
So one could argue that they could come after him for criminal crime, for criminal acts.
Well, perhaps, although we have a fellow named Angelica, now a professor here at the law school named Angelica Hendricks, who has written about how some of those things toll, the statute of limitations can toll on those things, and the tail on these cases is very long. In any event, we have
We were talking, wait, before we do, we were
Yeah.
talking about the human toll before, and I just want to show you this, because I show this when I go talk to folks, because what it does is it brings home for you what's at stake, more than just having my brother sitting here in front of you, okay? When I visited JJ more than about 250 times at Sing Sing over 20 years. So I also volunteered there with him, with a group of 11 men called Voices from Within. Guilty guys, about what it meant, redefining what it meant to pay debt to society. And I got to know the superintendent, the warden there very well. So on August 17th, 2021, Superintendent Capper I call him Soup, he calls me, JJ's got clemency from the governor, I'm gonna go tell him. I'm like, Soup, you can't tell him without me, I'm out, and I'm running out of my house, my shoelaces untied, battered. So I get over there and I'm filming the moment that he tells JJ he got clemency, 2021, and then he didn't get out for another 3 weeks. Why? Because that's the way the system works. And I filmed the moment that he walked out to his mother and his 2 kids, who I met when they were 8 and 5. They're now 30 and 27. And I took those 2 clips and I made a 1-minute, 50-second thing for you to watch, just so you could see that. Could somebody play that? I don't know what. Oh, do you want to do that?
I don't know if I, I don't know if I can.
Yeah, what?
You say it takes a bolt of lightning. It takes a human judge.
It takes a human judge.
Where are they? I don't get it.
They're denying the requests. A lot of them are former prosecutors. A lot of them feel the bar is way too high. A lot of them incorrectly say everybody in prison says they're innocent. Wrong. Like 80 to 90% of the people in prison will tell you they're guilty. It's baked into the system. I don't know how else to describe it. Here's the one thing. I can't explain human behavior. All I can explain are facts. And every single case that I've done, and I've done a lot, David went through a bunch of appeals that were denied. JJ went through a ton of appeals that were denied. Eric Lister went through, everybody has. Central Park exonerated 5, went through appeals that were, everybody did that was exonerated that we know are innocent now. But they all touched people within the system that said no.
Does the fact that they're elected have?
I don't think so.
There's nothing to suggest that we have more errors in jurisdictions with
I
elected
think it's
officials
like,
than with appointed officials.
I think it's like me and John are friends, and they come to me and they're like, go investigate his case, what he did wrong. And there's so much.
I think we can get the video now. Let's see if it goes.
So me and our good Deb Jackson, who happens to be the OD, she gets to experience this after so many years. We're going to tell JJ Velasquez that he got executive clemency
How long
today.
ago?
We just were notified minutes ago, half an hour ago, where I called you, you're here. I have to say, in my 40 years of service, this is one of the more exciting times in my whole entire career.
Why is it so? Why is it
Because
so
I know
exciting?
he doesn't belong here. Because
Yeah.
I know he doesn't belong here, and he's going to do fantastic things.
How does it
when he
feel
gets
to be
out.
the one that's about to
I'm
tell him?
overwhelmed. I really am. Right? See, she said, I have goosebumps. I said, you don't even know. I've been working here with him for 9 years. You being transferred.
Where?
You don't know?
No.
You know where 50 Overlook Road is in Haverstraw, New York?
Absolutely.
That's where you're going, bro.
Thank you, man.
That's where you're going. God bless you. You deserve it.
I apologize for those who are on Zoom if you couldn't hear that, but the sound that his mother makes, we will send a link to the video so that everybody can hear the video, and it's an incredible. I've never heard anything.
I heard it in person.
Watching you applaud in the moment here, right here, is
I waited a long time for that.
yeah. So we are over time. We have time for one question in the back. The second CLE password is exoneration. And for those of you who are here, we do have books available. Dan and David are going to sign. We'll take more questions. So if you have additional questions, there will be time to ask them. But one last question.
Yes, Mr. Lemus, I'm in awe of your strength and resilience. After all you endured, did the criminal justice system apologize? Should they? And would it have made a difference in allowing you to heal more rapidly?
I don't think it would have made a difference. Once you do something like that to someone, it's not going to make a difference. But I think it would have been the right thing to do. To this day, nobody's ever apologized. And I've gone to the point where you have to live and be okay with that.
Thank you.
Well, I'm certainly sorry on behalf of our government that happened to you, that it's happened to others, that it continues to happen, and we're going to keep telling your story until it stops. So thank you for being here. Dan, thank you. Thank you for this wonderful book.
Thank you for having us.
I heard David Brooks, who has a book about morality, talk about his book at a book talk, and he said moral people, or nice people read the book, good people talk about the book, moral people buy the book. So please be great examples of virtue.
This is my ask. Each one of you, please become lanterns of knowledge. Please take what you heard, look at his tears, look at the mother's tears. Understand what's at stake. When we vote for tough on crime policies, We're voting for things we don't even know what we're voting for, neither do the politicians. And they're passing laws without any sort of analysis or deliberation as to whether those laws are effective or not, and too often, they actually make us less safe. We don't vote for the EPA on how much arsenic should be in our water. We know what works. We know we need to treat people with human dignity. We know we have a hidden epidemic. We know we're emptying the ocean with a thimble. Just to educate yourself. If it means reading the book, if it means just being here tonight and telling somebody at home, telling another friend, that's the way we're going to change society. That's the way slavery ended. And that's the way mass incarceration is going to end.
Call Greg Abbott tonight.
Is that?
Call Greg Abbott tonight,
Oh,
Governor of Texas. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we're going to stop there and we'll meet you outside. Thank you.